put something on.
Yeah, it'll look great at the end. That's the thing.
We'll set up a separate time.
Okay.
Yeah, there's all sort of fancy things we can do.
Ready.
Great. Thank you. Okay, well, please introduce yourself, first of all.
How much of an introduction do you want as
Your
far
name, your title.
Okay.
As much as you'd like to give, really.
Okay. And should I be looking there or at you, or does it matter?
This camera would
Okay.
be a great one to look at, or if you'd like to look at that one, but
Okay.
look at this one.
Okay. So my name is Amy Millmeir-Schmidt, and I'm an assistant professor in biological systems engineering, and also have an appointment in animal science. And I have a research and extension split appointment.
Great, great. And now we can just
Okay.
you can look at me. But, so just tell me about yourself. How did you get interested in biological engineering? And
Okay. Well, I grew up in southeast Iowa, and although I didn't grow up on a farm, I did live out in the country, and I had my grandfather and my uncle farmed, and so I spent time around pigs and cattle and the tractor with them. I started out, when I went to Iowa State University after high school, I started out majoring in aerospace engineering. And when I got up there, yeah, it was kind of a jump. I got up there and I kind of realized that people that were graduating in that major were not getting jobs, and there was just not a good market for that type of job at that time. And so my other interest was environmental issues, and I had met some people who were majoring in agricultural engineering, which I'd never heard of prior to going there, and checked out that department and liked the idea of kind of combining agriculture and engineering and environmental issues. And so I saw that as a good fit, and ended up switching into ag engineering with an emphasis in soil and water. Then when I got ready to graduate with my undergrad degree, I really wasn't excited about any of the job prospects out there, and decided maybe I would do grad school. And there was a professor that had a project with manure management, and I thought that sounded kind of neat, so I went that direction, and that's led me to where I'm at today. So from aerospace engineering to manure, kind of a big jump, but yeah, that's where I ended up.
Very cool. Please give me a basic definition of what biological engineering and animal manure management is.
Okay, so agricultural and biological engineering is pretty broad. Most land-grant universities have a program that's moving more towards biological engineering. They used to all be called ag engineering, and so when they kind of have made this move to biological, UNL is one of the few schools that still has an ag engineering degree that they offer. But within that major, you can emphasize in power and machinery, so more the mechanized systems aspect of ag and engineering. There's soil and water, there's environment, structures and environment, so more designing the structures that animals live in, the ventilation, heating and cooling, that side of things. There's food processing, so it's really a major that kind of takes the technological aspect of agriculture and combines the technology and the animal and crop production and food production into one program. So you get more ag than you would get in, say, a mechanical engineering or an environmental engineering or food processing degree. And really it's, so it's just kind of the marriage of the technology and agriculture together.
Wow.
So it's a pretty unique program.
It sounds very unique. That's really cool. And one of your major areas of expertise is water quality. Can you give me just a basic definition of what water quality is and the importance of it?
Sure. So, water quality can be described different ways based on what the water is used for. So, quality of drinking water is far different from quality of recreational water, where we're having, swimming and fishing and human contact with the water, things like that. It really also differs a lot based on the geographical region where that water is located. So we know that we have pristine waters in places that are fed by natural springs, and so a change in water quality there is much different than we would consider in areas that are more surface water impoundments. So they're getting a lot more sediments and nutrients in the water. So it's really relative to where it's located and what it's being used for. But in general, we base it on either nutrient criteria. So is it impaired with nitrogen or phosphorus or bacteria? There's different compounds that we would consider as impairment causing impairment of water. And so water quality is based upon that particular compound and what that water is used for. So when water bodies get placed on an impaired water body list, there's some criteria by which they're designated as impaired, and it just varies by water body and the use of that water.
Very interesting. So with the impaired bodies of water, how can water quality negatively impact our land and air, or manure and air? How can manure negatively impact our
Sure.
water and air?
So the same things that make manure great for fertilizing cropland, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the bacteria that improve soil quality and tilth, are nutrients that aquatic water bodies need. So when we apply manure to land to fertilize crops, if it makes its way into water, those same nutrients are going to fertilize the aquatic plants and cause algae blooms and compete with the fish and the other aquatic organisms for oxygen. So when we have plants growing, they're utilizing oxygen, and the decay of those plants takes up oxygen in the water, and those are all things that cause fish kills and algae blooms and just poor water quality. So really the balance is using the nutrients on the land at the right rates so that we're not losing them to water bodies and causing pollution of water with that manure. As far as like air quality, you mentioned, there's compounds in manure as well. That usually the one we hear about most is odor. So odor in itself it can be measured, but it's more subjective. We don't really have it's not like ammonia or hydrogen sulfide where we can get a concentration of that chemical in the air. So usually what we hear the most about with manure in air issues is the odor. But what we really address and what regulations are more geared towards are actual gaseous compounds that are in there. So hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, methane, particulate matter, dust, those sorts of things.
Very interesting. And I've heard of the dangers of estrogen in water. Is this something that you want us to talk about?
We can. Basically we hear about things like steroid hormones and pharmaceutical compounds getting into water. And so when you talk about estrogen, there's a lot of different hormones, not just estrogen itself, but so we do know that agriculture can contribute to that. Just like with humans, when you take a medication or when we give a medication to animals, a lot of it is excreted. So the body uses what it needs and the remainder is excreted. So there's been quite a bit of research in recent years done by the U.S. Geological Survey looking at concentrations of, they call them PPCPs, or personal pharmaceuticals and personal care products in water. So that includes estrogens from birth control pills, just from natural excretion from the body. Any living creature has hormones, and so we excrete those naturally. Animals do as well. And so it's not just an agriculture issue. It's any waste product from any animal or human, and our water treatment plants. There's really a large variation in how much they can remove of those types of compounds, and pharmaceutical compounds as well. So we know that some of that is being discharged in municipal waste systems, but we also know that it's in manure from livestock. And so our role on the agricultural side is to try and figure out how long those compounds last in the environment. They break down, they change into different forms, figure out how they impact aquatic organisms, and then how they might impact humans as well. And so I feel like there's probably more questions than answers in that area. I mean, we still have a lot of work to do, but as the questions arise, there's people who are making that the focus of their research, and some of the work we've done here at UNL has looked at feedlot from runoff from feedlots and ways that we can kind of filter that feedlot runoff through grassed filter strip areas, and see how long those compounds stay in the environment. Do they run off? Are they broken down in the soil or on the soil surface? And so I think it will continue to be an issue that people are looking at. You know, there's work being done at the laboratory scale, then more wider scale environmental work to look at how those compounds are impacting aquatic species and how they might eventually impact humans. So, but unfortunately, I just think there's more questions than answers, really.
It's a fascinating thing, though, to think about how it's compounded and broken down. Very interesting. Can you tell me more about manure and its impact on the environment? I know we've talked about it a little bit.
Sure. So I would, let me see some of the different things that I've written down here. Did you have specific questions?
I'm more
about
just
it,
wondering
other
what you think like the most important impact on the environment of manure is, or
Okay.
of manure's impact on the environment is.
Okay. So one of the first things I would say, I guess, is that manure it's a nutrient source. That's what it's kind of the most natural fertilizer for crops and that's how we treat it. There's a lot of things that producers do to make sure that they're using it in the right amount. So like I said earlier, when you apply the manure, you're building the soil quality. The manure, the microorganisms in the manure help the soil. We use the term soil health, but that really refers to the chemical and biological and physical properties of the soil. So the water holding capacity, the ability to till the soil, and the ability of the roots to grow down through the soil and pull water from the soil to the plant. And we know that manure has a beneficial impact on all of those things. It adds nutrients to the soil, it adds organic matter. So our role is figuring out the right balance, how much to put on there so that the crops are getting what they need, but there's not so much that we're losing it through leaching of nitrogen into groundwater or the runoff of those nutrients and other contaminants into surface water. We also know there's pathogens in manure. Any warm-blooded animal is going to have similar microbial populations in the gut. Those are excreted in the manure. And like I said earlier, the antimicrobial compounds and pharmaceutical compounds that are in there, we know that that those are excreted, and we're doing research to look at how they what the fate of those compounds are in the environment. And so to me, I think a lot of people don't realize that farmers have to have nutrient management plans in place, and that's usually something that's written by a consultant, an environmental expert, and it's kind of a 5-year plan for the different sources of manure on that farm, where they'll be applied, when they'll be applied, how much will be put on. It's really kind of a prescriptive document that lays out, how that manure will be used. So they're not just going out, we have a nice day, let's haul some manure and get rid of it. It's really more scientific than that, and pretty involved process. And so, so the work that we do is kind of focused on getting a better understanding of how to put manure on, the timing of manure with respect to rainfall, precipitation, the method that we use, whether we inject it or surface apply it, whether it's treated in some way before it's land applied, and how all of those factors would impact the losses of nutrients and other contaminants in runoff and losses to the environment. So it's, it's a pretty scientific process as far as figuring out how to use it, where to use it, and when to use it, and I don't think a lot of people realize that.
Right, it's a lot more than people think about. And
Sure.
They smell it, but they don't think about it.
Right.
That's kind of how it works.
Right.
So you talk about your research. What does that work like? Who does it? How is it conducted?
Okay, so we have several different areas of research right now that I'm working with. One of those is, they're all related to either manure or animal byproducts. And when I say animal byproducts, I'm usually referring to like the mortalities, the death loss on the farm, and oftentimes we will compost that material. So again, we create a biological product that's used as a soil amendment again. And so, so one of the projects that we're working with now is looking at the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus, or PEDV, and that's a virus that has been pretty detrimental to the swine industry, causes pretty high death losses. It's not a human health issue at all. It's not a food safety issue. It's a virus that's only spread among swine. But we are looking at how it survives in the environment. So when manure is land applied in the fall, which is typical, and then you wait until spring to go back out and plant, we want to get a better understanding of how that virus survives in the soil over time. And so we've got a project looking at that. We've also got one where we're looking at the survival of that virus when you compost the mortality. So if you can you reach high enough temperatures when you compost PEDV positive mortalities that's not a source of reinfecting the herd after that composting process is finished. We had a project last summer at the field scale that was looking at, like I mentioned earlier, the timing and application of manure, method of manure application. So we were looking at broadcast versus injected, and then simulating rainfall at different periods after that manure application to see what kind of losses of nutrients and bacteria and coliform bacteria we got from those plots. So we want to be able to tell producers, if you inject the manure and it's at least 2 days before you get precipitation, you'll have very minimal losses of nutrients or minimal losses of pathogenic bacteria from the soil. And that helps us with best management practices for manure. So we can tell producers, if rain is predicted in the next 24 hours, don't go out and pump. If you can get a day where you've got at least 48 hours before rainfall is predicted, then that's your best bet for when to apply. So it's answering fairly complex questions, but for a producer, they want to know, when should I put my manure out? Should I broadcast or inject it? What rate should I use? Those sorts of things. And so we do that research, and the goal is to be able to turn around and tell producers, this is how you should manage your manure to make it the most economically beneficial for you. You retain nitrogen and you get that material available to your crops to grow, and to have the most minimal impact on the environment and the people around where you're operating. So as far as who does it, I have graduate students in my research group that are doing some of the work for thesis projects, and then I've also got quite a few undergraduate students that help with lab activities, kind of do more of the hands-on manual labor as far as helping with sample collection out in the field and those sorts of things. I find that my job is mostly writing the proposals to get the money to fund the research, getting people started and showing them how to do things, and then standing back and letting the grad students run those projects, and then helping with publishing the information afterwards. So I like the hands-on side of it. I like to go out in the field with them as much as I can, but a lot of times they're the ones that are actually doing the majority of the work. So so we do quite a bit in the lab. We do quite a bit at the field level as well. But yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. And you said you write the grants to get it funded. How is your research funded?
Yeah. So in order to get projects funded, you're usually looking at external funding opportunities. There's some internal ones as far as some certain topics or collaborations that the university is promoting. One last summer was trying to promote collaborations between folks in Institute of Ag and Natural Resources with the Meat Animal Research Center, and so we got a proposal funded through that funding opportunity. Other than that, I've had proposals, have a couple currently that are funded through the National Pork Board and the Nebraska Pork Producers Association. So if there's something specific to a commodity group, then there's usually funding available through them. The Nebraska Environmental Trust is another source that I've got some funds that I'm operating under now, and I've got other proposals into them. And they're focusing on sustainable environments, and so we can usually tie our research into their priorities as well. The Rural Future Institute here at UNL is another one that we've got a proposal we're developing for them. And then there's a lot of federal funding opportunities through the USDA and National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, and those sorts of things. And those are big proposals, multi-million-dollar proposals. Pretty difficult to get, and pretty low funding percentage. 10% of proposals submitted get funded. So, but that's a lot of the smaller projects that we do, the goal is to be collecting data that can support one of those larger proposals down the road to continue that specific line of research. So.
Very cool. Very interesting to see how that all comes together.
Yeah.
And what are the goals for your work? Any short-term, mid-term, or long-term goals?
So I think my ultimate long-term goal is improving social and environmental sustainability and minimizing social and environmental risks associated with livestock production. So for me, this means finding better ways to manage manure and the livestock systems themselves, so that we're helping producers understand how and why they should implement certain practices. So whether it's helping them understand, like I said, how and when and why to apply a manure at a certain time, or helping them understand how feeding antibiotics to their animals impacts human health and the environment and that sort of thing. To me, it's taking that research and getting it to the producers and giving them a reason to change the way they're doing things. Other than that, I really think that agricultural producers are interested in protecting the environment, protecting the people who are consuming the food that they're producing. And, I think they want to do what's right. So I think as I see some of the issues changing as far as what consumers are concerned with, from the food safety aspect, from animal welfare, from environmental management and those sorts of things, as we see those concerns change, then my job is to look at some of those issues and decide where I might be able to do research that would help improve consumer perception of agriculture, help show them how we're improving the way that we do things. And so I have a real interest in the consumer side of agriculture. And sometimes it's hard to make that connection between managing the manure and protecting public health, but it's all really connected when we talk about the contaminants that come from manure and how those can affect the environment and the water supply and ultimately the consumers that are eating the products that are being produced either by those animals or by the manure that's put on the crops that's eventually maybe making it to human consumption. So I think that that's kind of my long-term goal, is just to be addressing those social and environmental risks, improving consumer confidence in their in the food production system, and helping producers remain profitable and produce the food that we need to feed not only the people in our country but worldwide. And I think people maybe don't have a full understanding of just how wonderful we have it here in the United States. We have a very safe and abundant food supply, the best in the world, and we can afford to be picky about our food, how it's produced, where it comes from, but not everybody has that luxury. And so I think we just have to strike that balance between producing enough food to feed everyone and still doing it in a fashion that's safe for the environment and good for the planet. And I think that's where myself and a lot of other researchers in this area, come into play and work together on that issue. So.
Very cool. That's really important.
Yeah.
Very important stuff. I'm going to take a drink of water, so
Okay.
excuse me for just a
I will
second.
do the same.
So afraid I was going to cough. Oh, that's better. What a refreshment. Oh, so great. At the end of your career, what would you like to have accomplished?
I guess ultimately I hope I've answered more questions than I've created by the research. That's one of the interesting things about research, is that every project answers the small question but generates a lot of other questions. I hope I've helped the industry, the producers that are raising livestock and utilizing manure in their cropping systems. I hope I've helped them understand better ways to manage their manure and their animal byproducts to reduce environmental risk. Hopefully, we've improved consumer confidence in the food supply. We've answered questions that are of importance to the consumers, and showed them that, that conventional livestock production is sustainable. There's a lot of work that we've seen going on through the National Pork Board as far as carbon footprints and environmental footprints, water footprints, and we've seen a lot of improvements in the last 50 years as far as energy conservation, water conservation, producing greater numbers of animals, but overall, more pounds of fresh meat per unit of input than we saw 50 years ago. And I think that's good, but I think consumers want to see that, see even greater improvement there. And so my hope is that, I can help contribute to that through finding the better ways to utilize our nutrients so that we're growing the most crops we can in the healthiest way possible. And we're able to produce more animals on smaller amounts of land and still utilize that manure in a safe way. And overall, I think just, like I say, improving consumer confidence in the system and helping producers make decisions that are benefiting them and their bottom line, but also sustaining the environment, because I think that's what everybody's really wants to see happen, regardless of how those animals are raised. I think sustainability is kind of the buzzword among the public that they want to see.
And you touched on the global impact of pretty much everything in agriculture and feeding the world. How will your research affect me and you and children in other countries? What's the local and global impact in that?
So I think at the most basic level, it's part of a much larger and diverse effort to ensure that livestock production remains sustainable, that it's viable and acceptable. I think there's a lot of people who would like to see us go back to a day and age where we raised animals the way we used to 50 years ago, because it's, they have that kind of idyllic picture of livestock production that way, but I don't really think that's sustainable, and I don't think it's going to feed the world. I mentioned earlier about how lucky we are in this country. We try to make our kids realize just how lucky they are to have every kind of food they want. It's readily available, it's affordable, and but at the same time, we have to realize that there's a lot of people that aren't that fortunate. And so I think by doing this type of research where we are increasing production and at the same time trying to minimize our impact on the environment and remain sustainable, we're working towards being able to feed the whole world with fewer inputs at a lower cost and make these high quality proteins and other food products available to people that don't have those now. So, on a local level, we're trying to improve the environment here. We want everybody to have safe drinking water and healthy air to breathe and healthy food and have, minimize our impact on human health in the way we do things. But on a global level, we realize that there's a lot of people that we need to feed, and we need to do it in a way that, like I said, strikes that balance between feeding the world, being food secure, and also protecting our natural resources and the planet. So I think it's pretty easy to see the global impact of what this research is looking at.
Absolutely. Very important. Very, very important. So why should the public be interested or concerned with your current work? I was talking earlier about traveling and talking with people in an airport or on an airplane and it's interesting when they ask what I do. I always kind of, I kind of hesitate and think, well, what's the most glamorous way I can say that I work with manure? And so I talk about the research and the different aspects of it and how that, integrates into food production and all of that. And it's interesting to see people kind of have that aha moment where they realized, and they say, wow, I didn't realize that this type of research even happens. And so I think, my research specifically, but a lot of the research that's done at land-grant universities and in USDA laboratories and that sort of thing, I think it's just really important for the public to understand that, all of these issues that they read about online or hear about in the news and those sorts of things, that there are people working on small
aspects of those that all ties together into looking for the larger solution of food security, of food safety, of environmental protection, and that ability to tie all those together and just make sure that people realize what the heck goes on behind the scenes. Because we hear about the issues, we don't hear about the solutions maybe that are being investigated to solve those issues, and I think that's really too bad. Because everything that's every issue that they hear about, there's somebody working on a solution. A lot of people probably working on various solutions to that issue. Like I said, manure management isn't usually an exciting topic that people want to talk about, but I think it's important for people to realize that, for instance, the PEDV research, that's tying into the cost of pork. If we can find ways to reduce how that virus is spread, we reduce mortality losses, and we bring the price of pork back down because we've got the supply there. The work looking at contribution of manure and municipal biosolids to antibiotic resistance in the environment, that's getting back to a very serious public health issue of antimicrobial resistant bacteria. And so the aspect of managing the manure, understanding how those antimicrobial compounds and the antimicrobial resistant bacteria that might be excreted by the animal, how those are surviving and moving within the environment. That again gets back to a very important public health issue. And again, looking at water quality as it's impacted by manure runoff and nitrogen leaching in the groundwater and that sort of thing. Again, comes back to a very important public health issue and the use of our water bodies for recreation. Things that if you don't have them, it's a pretty serious loss to your land base and to your economy, and can also negatively impact human health. So like I said, at first glance, manure management doesn't sound that exciting, but when you start tying it into a lot of these bigger issues that people are concerned with, then I think they realize why that connection, or how that connection exists, and why we research it and try to find solutions to some of those issues.
Absolutely. And just for clarification and definition of my article, can you just explain what a microbe and antimicrobial mean exactly?
Okay, so antimicrobials are those medications or pharmaceutical compounds that are, whether we take antibiotics to get over a sinus infection, or we give antibiotics to livestock because they have, respiratory infection or something like that. So those are the antimicrobial compounds. And in the same way that our body doesn't necessarily metabolize all of that and we excrete some of it, animals do the same. And so you find antimicrobial compounds in the environment because they've been excreted by humans and livestock. And then antimicrobial resistant bacteria are the bacteria that have developed some resistance to those different antimicrobials. And the interesting thing is that, yes, we know that overuse of antibiotics leads to antibiotic resistance in some bacteria, but we also know that there's natural antibiotic resistance in the environment as well. So a lot of people don't make the connection that antibiotics are derived from soil microbes. Those microbes that have been living in the soil for millions of years have developed their own natural resistance to some of the antimicrobial compounds. And so that's one of those places where we get more questions than answers, because we think that it's all man-made, this issue of antimicrobial resistance, but then you look at native soils that have never had manure application to them other than wild animals, and we still find resistance to antimicrobials. So, and then we could also get into talking about antimicrobial resistance genes, so the ability to transfer that resistance from one bacteria, one organism to another, that's conferred in the actual genes, not in the live organism itself. So, so there's a lot more questions than answers really surrounding how that antimicrobial resistance develops, how it is transferred between organisms, and how it can impact human health and that.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
How do you think your expertise contributes to our topic of One Health, animals, plants, and us?
Okay, so obviously, plants and people and animals are all connected. It's in the food supply, for one. Like I mentioned earlier, I think manure is kind of the ultimate natural fertilizer for crops. And when we're using a product like that and we realize that there's potential contaminants in it, environmental contaminants in the way of nutrients, or human health contaminants in the way of pathogenic organisms, or antimicrobial resistant bacteria, that sort of thing, we need to understand that connection, that the way that we manage that manure can impact more than just the crops that we're growing. It can impact the water, which impacts human health, and it can impact humans directly through food safety issues. So I think manure is kind of intimately connected to all of those different areas based on how it's used and how it's managed. And ideally, we want to manage the manure so that we're optimizing plant growth, we're optimizing the quality of those plants that are fed back to the animals and producing protein for humans. And at the same time, we want to really think about how that narrow research is impacting other areas of research that other folks are working on. And I think I'm guilty of it, and I'm sure a lot of other researchers are guilty of kind of looking how their research, kind of get that narrow focus of looking at how your research impacts this one topic that you're studying, but really it's interlinked. And so when the nutritionists are looking at how they feed animals, that's impacting what's generated in the manure, and when I'm working with how that manure is applied to the land, that's impacting the quality of the soil and erosion of the soil and the quality of the crops that are grown from it, and it's impacting potentially the water quality and air quality and generally social acceptance of agriculture. So I think we're all connected, and I feel like managing manure to minimize environmental risk and social risks is kind of part of that big picture of keeping the planet healthy, keeping the animals healthy, the plants that we're growing, the environment, and then the people that are living in that environment and consuming those food products that we're producing.
It is amazing to see how it's all interconnected.
Yeah,
It definitely
yeah.
is. Well, very interesting. Did I miss anything? Is there anything else you'd like to share or add?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Okay.
I don't think so. I think
Is there anything that people never ask you about that?
No, I don't
That's
think so.
okay. That's great. I
yeah.
just wanted to check. and
Usually
see.
when you start talking about manure, people have a lot of questions about why in the world are you working with that, but yeah, no, I don't.
But I
think
mean,
we
your
covered it.
answers definitely let me know. I mean,
Yeah.
very interesting, fascinating work, really, of how it does just affect everything. All of that is very interconnected.
Yeah,
But
it was very fresh in my mind. I was traveling last week and I had some really awesome conversations on the airplane to and from my meeting that I was going to, and just, I'm sure the people in front of me were like, what are these people talking about back there, and got way more education than they bargained for. But yeah, it's always interesting to talk to somebody who's not at all related to agriculture, and then they start asking questions about, well, I've heard this or I've heard that, and give them an education that they may not otherwise get. So
that's good. That's a good responsibility.
Yep.
Is there anything you'd like to
May I
ask?
ask a
Yeah.
question?
Sure.
I don't remember what percentage of your appointment is extension, but in your experience, what are the best ways to communicate this information to the public, and what tips could you give us to do a better job of what we do?
So word of mouth is such a big deal among consumers, I think. It's interesting to hear consumers say who they trust for their information, and a lot of people have done those sorts of surveys. I have a Facebook page called Dr. Amy Talks Ag, where I share information, whether it's my own research or sharing other things that I've read. I have a Twitter account with the same name, but I never get around to using that. Facebook, I tend to be on more on my personal basis too, so it's easier to manage that. and I think I would have the same question of what's the best way to reach people, because from my perspective, I want to answer questions when I see it on social media or other places like that, but it's so hard if you're not an expert in that topic. You could take a lot of time researching it and generating a response that sounds intelligent and would be accepted by those people. One of the things we're trying to do here, we've got a new audience grant from Extension, some of these small grants that Chuck made available, and we're doing a training in April that is focused on helping people engage consumers in discussions about agricultural topics. There's the Center for Food Integrity that has the Engage training, they call it, which is a training that talks about taking these topics and learning how to communicate these issues to consumers. And so we're going to have them come in, and then we've also got some other experts talking about different sustainability, food safety, GMOs, those types of topics. And we're going to do a social media training with that as well that kind of explains how do you share this information. You don't want to say you're educating people, because people don't necessarily want to be educated on this stuff. But how do you engage consumers in these conversations and talk to them about science, and without seeming condescending or like you're trying to change their mind, even though that's probably what you're really trying to do. So I don't know if I have any real great tips on how to communicate that, but I think it's an issue that we probably all need more practice in and more experience with, because that seems to be, engaging consumers and doing it in a way that shares the information and gets science out there so that they understand it, I think is, it's only going to get more important,
I think that's the only question that I have to add.
Okay.
Yes, your answers were fantastic. Thank
Okay,
you
well,
for
thanks.
all the description,
Sure.
everything. And I will be in touch with you about my article process.
Okay.
and letting you know more about it.
Yeah, so is that like over the next month or so that you'll be working on those? Okay.
Mhm.
Well, actually, yes, I'm sure Kelly will have her article done soon.
I'll jump on it as fast as I can.
Well, I'll be out. I'm going to be gone the next couple of weeks on a vacation, so
Oh,
I was
great.
going to say if you're expecting a response right
Oh,
away.
no, don't worry about
probably
it. Do
won't
not.
get it from me, because I'm going to be in Florida and
Oh, fun.
be
Is
away
that family or?
My parents have a winter home down there, and so we're going to spend a week with them and then go up to Disney World and
Oh,
spend a week at Disney.
yay.
So yeah, the kids have never been there, and so,
How
yeah.
old are they?
Our son will be 9 this weekend, and then our daughter's 4. So
That's great fun.
yeah, so we're just like, they're excited about seeing Grandma and Grandpa in Disney World,
Yeah.
and we're excited about not being in Nebraska cold weather for a couple weeks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly when it turns nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. If I come back to 60-degree weather, that'll be just fine with
There
me.
you
but
go. That's
I
the
don't really
perfect
believe
little-
that's going to happen.
That is.